Project ECHO. We are recording today's session. We put the recording on our Canvas page for you to participants to go back and review those, as well as to just continue to share the information. If you'll take a minute and rename your profile so that we know who is here, where you're from, what your profession is. And then we've all been on Zoom for the last little while and probably know how to raise our hand and put questions in chat. But if you don't, here are the steps again on how to raise your hand. We are talking about some information that can be identifiable. So please remember to protect that information. Don't use real first, last, or middle names, any family members, anything that can let us know who those people are. We want to make sure that we have that privacy with it. If you have any questions, reach out to a hub member. They all have an asterisk in front of their name. ECHO is an interactive community where we want to make sure we know each other and we can learn from each other. So please make sure that you ask those questions that you have, put them into chat, or just come unmute and we'll call on you. If you can also leave I know it's at lunchtime, so sometimes we turn our cameras off to eat lunch, but if you can turn your camera on, it helps us know who's on the call, get to know each other. Like I just asked, no, Pat always has her hair colored, and I called on her because she showed up on my screen. So it's a great way to continue to get to know each other, even over Zoom. Another way is those case narratives. Case narratives are a great way to get information and learn more about the case. I know a few sessions ago, I presented on a case, and the people have just been thrilled with all of your guys' recommendations, and hopefully one day I might do a follow-up on that. The key components of an ECHO session are just that community of practice. We do have a didactic speaker, and then we do our case presentation and recommendations. Again, case studies are a great way to hear from your colleagues about recommendations. So if you're interested in doing a case presentation, please send us an email at projectscope@usu.edu. To get our certificate of attendance for these sessions, we do ask that you complete the evaluation that is sent to you after each session. Once a month, we mail out those certificates. So a huge shout out to everyone who has completed those surveys. Kurt, do you have anything that you want to talk about with the surveys?
It's all been updated. So the once a month, you should be getting a response to your a certificate. I've had a couple people reach out and indicate that they hadn't received a certificate yet, but I've updated it today as of right now. And so you should be getting a certificate in the coming days or weeks.
Hey,
thank you.
Thanks. Our Canvas and RedCap is where we store any of our recordings, as well as the collection of our evaluation tools. So if you need access to Canvas, please reach out to either Kurt Phillips at USU or Project Scope, and we'll get that set up for you. And once again, just a huge thank you to everybody who has completed those surveys. It really helps keep these sessions free of charge and lets us then know how we need to improve. If you check your spam or junk email folder, sometimes things go to that. So I'm really thrilled today to have Madison, Elliot, and Britney Bird from the Family Place talk to us about the trauma and the ARC framework. So Madison, they'll tell a little bit more about you guys about what they're doing. We were joining on earlier, and I said, what is one thing that I could do? Well, Madison was really able to pull up some current and new pictures of her babies, her two dogs, Boone and Ism, right? Did I say that right? I hope so. Britney and I struggled to find current pictures of our kids. Britney was a little bit faster. So dog children are easier. So she really enjoys spending time with her family and her dogs. And then Britney just has a wealth of information and also just really enjoys spending time with her 7-year-old son and her family. And I told them that once they maybe get to be teenagers, she might not enjoy them quite as much. But so I am going to stop sharing and turn the time over to them. I do just want to remind you guys that our next session will be June 8th, and we'll be having our peer mentors share with us. So I'm going to stop sharing if I can find my stop share screen and let them take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Janelle. And thank you to everyone for allowing us to come and present to you about trauma-informed care, but primarily the attachment regulation and competency ARC model, and talking about how we can apply this to children who have been impacted by the opioid epidemic. I'll go ahead and get started. This is just our introductory slide. We are from the Family Place, and at the Family Place, we use the attachment regulation and competency model in all aspects of what we do here. And one really great thing about the attachment regulation and competency, or ARC model, I'll just refer to it as ARC from here on out, is that it can be applied in a therapeutic setting, it can be applied in a child care setting, and it can also be an educational resource to teach parents about parenting skills and how to parent from a trauma-informed perspective. Moving on to our first slide, I want to talk a little bit about what trauma-informed care is. And it can be a very subjective definition as well too, which is also one of the great things about trauma-informed care is it's very client-centered and very subjective to what a client may express or what a client may feel their needs are. In a trauma-informed care setting, we work with people in a way that acknowledges and is sensitive to the impact of trauma and strives to ease physical and emotional safety for all participants. And as you see down here, we have acknowledgement, we have support, and we have trust. But there's also several different ways that agencies can become trauma-informed. And agencies can become trauma-informed by recognizing the widespread effect of trauma upon the clients that they serve, but also upon our community as a whole. And one thing that our project, the Trauma Resiliency Project, hopes to accomplish is being able to educate our community partners about trauma, traumatic stress, and ACEs. We also really focus on supporting our clients, supporting our communities, and building trust with our clients and communities, because without trust, we can't practice trauma-informed care, because a lot of our individuals that we serve have experienced significant trauma, and perhaps some of their trauma has come from accessing services or from service providers. And so it's very helpful for us to build rapport and establish trust and transparency. Moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about childhood traumatic stress. And I also want to talk about the ACEs study. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with the ACEs study. First, I'm going to talk about childhood traumatic stress. So those children who suffer from child traumatic stress are those who have been exposed to one or more traumas over the course of their lives and develop reactions that persist and affect their daily lives after the events have ended. And some of those possible immediate symptoms that we might see are just symptoms of depression or anxiety, maybe changes in behaviors. So sometimes we may see risky decisions like engaging in drug or alcohol use, engaging in unsafe sexual behaviors, or engaging in other unsafe behaviors like self-mutilation or other forms of self-harm. Some children may have difficulty with self-regulation, so an inability to regulate their emotions independently, or difficulty building and maintaining attachments. So their attachment patterns may look different than they did before the traumatic stress happened. Some things that we look for when we serve children in a therapeutic capacity is we want to look at the intensity and the duration and the frequency of the traumatic stress, how often it occurred, how intense it was, and the impact that it's had on the child's psychosocial functioning, along with other types of functioning like their scholastic functioning, or how has this impacted their identity or their view of self. And some likely symptoms, they might be long-term if children don't have access to treatment. So children may have long-term health problems like heart and lung diseases, earlier death, increased likelihood of involvement with JJS, increased health risk behaviors like smoking, substance use, eating disorders, and high-risk activities. So as we know, these are some of the symptoms that are also associated with ACEs. And the CDC suggests that about 61% of adults surveyed across 25 states, so not all 50 states, so this could be a little higher or a little lower, reported that they had experienced at least one ACE before age 18. And as we know, those ACEs are experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, or having a family member attempt or die by suicide. But we also know too that having a relative in the criminal justice system has been identified as an ACE as well. And in applying this material to Project Scope and the clientele that you guys strive to provide services for or brainstorm about ways to help, that can be true for a lot of our children who have been impacted by the opioid epidemic. Another thing too is the child's environment, their sense of safety, stability, and ability to bond with a caregiver may be impacted if their parent has issues with substance misuse. And in turn, we know that issues with substance misuse can also impact parental mental health, thus impacting the child's mental health. And it may also cause instability for that child. And from a trauma-informed perspective, we know that instability can also lead to mental health concerns. And in thinking about ACEs and right, it all just adds up and it all really coincides. And as we know too, preventing these ACEs, which seems like you guys are doing some fantastic work with that through Project Scope and ECHO, but preventing ACEs can potentially reduce these health conditions. And ACEs have long-lasting negative effects on health and well-being, as well as life opportunities like accessing higher education or accessing jobs that pay more or accessing jobs where individuals feel safe and they feel validated and they feel appreciated. And also ACEs can impact social determinants of health, like living in a resourced area or in preventing an individual's experience of food insecurity. I could do a whole presentation on all of those things, right? But for what we need in this presentation, I'll probably cap it there. But I want to talk a little bit about how we can prevent ACEs as well too, and how we can prevent ACEs and how we can prevent trauma for individuals and children who are impacted by the opioid epidemic. The CDC suggests the following: early intervention to lessen immediate and long-term harms, connecting youth to services within the community, teaching skills, ensuring a strong start for children, and promoting social norms that protect against violence and adversity, bystander approaches, really dispelling myths of trauma, and strengthening those economic supports to families. Moving forward, I'd like to talk a little bit about why. Why should we be trauma informed, right? It's really nice to have all of these fantastic guidelines about trauma informed care, but why do we do it? Their perspective is their reality. It's very client centered to start where they are. And starting where they are is trauma informed, meeting them where they're at and recognizing that right now what they're going through, this is their reality. And it doesn't help for us to come in and suggest all of these great things that they can do at first to make changes It's good to just sit with them at first and see where they're at. And normalize that it's okay that they feel this way after experiencing these very troubling events. Trauma happens, right? Like we talked about with the prevalence of ACEs. Most adults have experienced at least one ACE. 1 in 6 adults from that CDC statistic that I mentioned, 61% across 25 states. 1 out of 6 of those 61% reported that they had experienced 4 or more types of ACEs by age 18. Trauma-informed care also promotes safety, a sense of felt safety, empowerment, and healing. And sometimes the relationship is what heals. Sometimes the relationship is the intervention. Kindness, validation, and empathy. All of those principles, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Carl Rogers, but those Rogerian type principles where we meet our clients with that unconditional positive regard, that warmth and that congruency, that can be what heals. I want to turn it over to Britney. Britney is going to talk to us about why ARC. Why do we love ARC so much? There's a lot of reasons, and Britney will make you fall in love with it too.
All right, so as we kind of get started into ARC, I want to give you a little bit of a background of why it matters, because it does. And I'll be honest, this is a framework that I learned about when I wasn't in a social service position. I was doing events and doing that sort of thing. And I immediately recognized that there was pieces of ARC that I wanted to implement in my own home and with my son. And so as we're going through this, you'll find, I hope that you find, that although it is focused on helping children that have gone through traumatic events and helping their caregivers, that we also can find even just 1 or 2 little things that we can do as practitioners to bring out better for our clients, better for ourselves. So like Maddie talked about earlier, ARC is attachment, regulation, and competency. It's a flexible framework made for children, adolescents, and their caregivers, which is what makes it different and sets it apart from a lot of different frameworks. The Family Place brought on ARC framework as kind of our entire organizational framework to support trauma-informed care through our SAMHSA grant. So many of you know about SAMHSA and all of that. So that's where it kind of came from. A lot of our information comes from the NCTSN, or the National Childhood Traumatic Stress Network. And the reason that the Family Place chose ARC is because it's built upon 4 key areas that we really believe at the Family Place as well, and that they're important. And that's normative childhood development, traumatic stress, attachment, and risk and resilience. So we found that ARC was just the way to go in building a trauma-informed network across our entire organization. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so here is the actual framework itself. And so if you kind of look at it, it looks like a house, and it's split into that attachment, regulation, and competency. So on the very bottom in our yellow or orange section, that's our foundation pieces. Those are the things that ARC teaches that without these pieces, you will not be able to do the rest. You will not be able to learn and grow. And you'll not be able to attune or effectively respond to your clients if you're not able to kind of build these foundation pieces. Then as you move up, we have the attachment section, the regulation section, and the competency. And then our roof is our trauma experience integration. And this kind of pulls it all together just like a roof does. It kind of gets that point, brings it all together and says, trauma happens. And these children and these families need to understand that trauma has impacts on them throughout their lives. It may have happened and it may be in the past, but it can impact them as we move forward. All right, so now I'm going to go through and kind of show you each of the different building blocks just in a quick rundown, hopefully give you a tip or trick in each one, and then we'll turn the time back over to do your case study. So Maddie, you can go to the next slide for me. Okay, so on the very bottom foundations, we start with engagement. The main idea of engagement is to look Many look at it as a client if they're engaged, as if they're simply being there. But engagement is so much more than just being there and present. It's about active participation, collaboration. It involves belief. You have to believe in what you're doing in order for it to be successful. The main thing I want you to take away from engagement is that the caregiver and the client must be actively engaged for intervention to be successful. So in ARC, the caregiver is the parent, but the caregiver can also be a therapist. The caregiver can also be a support staff working in like our child center at the family place. A caregiver can be whoever is actually working with the child or with the family to kind of better that family's life. So when we're talking about the caregiver needs to be engaged, I challenge you to remember that as you're working with your clients, we're challenging them to do things. We want them to make the changes in their life. But a lot of the things that we also need to look at is, are you actively engaged? Did you bring something in from your session before? Are you dealing with hard things at home? And whatever else. And are you bringing that into actually working with who you're working with? And would that possibly affect their ability to be engaged? So when we're talking about engagement, it's critical that both the caregiver and the client are engaged and ready to participate. All right, next building block. All right, education. So education is still in that foundation section. We still are talking about needing to build skills in order to be successful practitioners. So with education, we look at providing information to caregivers and children so they can understand what is happening to them and why it's happening to them. So a lot of times, especially in working in our kids' place, we are the shelter for cash and rich counties. And so we get children that have been removed from their homes for abuse or neglect. And a lot of times when they first come in to meet with us and to kind of, learn their surroundings, they have no idea why the police took them away, why they're in our care, and why they're not with their parents. Most of the time, there's not been a lot of discussion in the why behind it. They also, especially as children, but parents as well, caregivers as well, don't understand that previous trauma can impact present times and even future times. And so as we're talking about education, we're talking about teaching them that trauma happens, it exists, and it impacts our ability to do what we need to do in everyday life, which is why it's critical to educate. So then we can say, oh, we do have a problem. All right, let's move to our next step and find out what else we need to do. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, last part of our foundation piece. So again, engagement, education, and now routines and rhythms. And this routines and rhythms builds predictability and a sense of safety so children and caregivers know what to expect. We all like our routines. We all like to know and be able to predict what's going to happen. And in those situations that we can't, those are the ones that become extremely stressful or cause triggers to happen. And I'm sure most of you, as you work with children and families that are dealing with the opioid epidemic, that's something that you see all the time, that a lot of these families don't understand or don't recognize that children that grow up in homes affected by drugs have an environment that's unpredictable. And in a lot of times, caregivers that are emotionally or physically unavailable. And so when we're talking about helping children and helping families move from these traumatic events, dealing with drugs and dealing with other traumatic stresses, I believe the first thing we need to do is build a predictable and safe environment for them. So they feel like they know where to go, they know what to do, and they can do this through building routines. It can be as simple as every time they come in, you give them a high five. I'm sure all of you have seen, and if you haven't, YouTube it, but there's some teachers that do this amazing thing that every child that walks into their classroom, they have a different handshake that they do. And it's a simple, 3-second handshake of some sort of silliness that they do. Teacher does it with each student. And that gives the student, number one, gets them engaged, right? It helps them feel safe. It helps them feel acknowledged. But then also it builds that routine. They know when they come into the classroom, it's time to learn, okay, we're going to do our awesome handshake, and then we're going to move into what we need to do next. So as we're talking about routines and rhythms, it doesn't have to be this intense daily schedule. It can be simple little things that we do to build in those rhythms so they feel safe. You'll hear me say it a lot throughout the rest of this presentation. All of ARC, all of ACEs and preventing ACEs is focused on the idea of building safety. And so if we can do that, we can help our clients. Next slide. All right. Caregiver affect management is our first one in our attachment section of ARC. So ARC attachment A. The main idea of caregiver affect management is recognizing that being a caregiver is difficult because children rely on their caregivers for everything that they need. And so as practitioners, number one, we need to take care of ourselves because we're caregivers as well. But we also need to recognize that the caregivers we're working with, society is telling them they need to do everything. But we need to teach them they need to take time for themselves as well. Otherwise, they will not be effective in helping their children move forward through childhood traumatic stress. And so as we're talking about this, the tip that I want to give is our self-care plan. And this is something that came through ARC. It's really simple. Sometimes we over explain and we go big on what our self-care plan has to be, right? We're not successful at self-care unless we go get a massage every week, or we're not successful at self-care if I'm not working out every day. If I'm not eating every meal, a healthy meal, right? With all of our proteins and veggies. But that's not what self-care necessarily has to be. Self-care can be broken up into 3 simple sections. First is one thing that you're going to do before you go into a stressful event, or before you go into a hard session, or before you meet with a family that you know is going through rough things. So what's something you can do before? This is getting a good night's sleep, eating a meal or getting a snack before you go into these events. It's having a support system available to you if you need them. Something simple. Next is number 2 is in the moment. So what is something you can do for self-care in the moment? These are the ever popular fidget toys. These are the breathing exercises. These are the things that you can do in any moment to be able to help yourself regulate your emotions and stay calm, even in a difficult situation. So as we're talking about in the moment techniques, like I said, breathing, it could be getting a drink of water. It could be taking a 5-minute break and walking around your facility. It could be going to chat with a coworker for a minute. Whatever it is, you have to have something that you can do in the moment. Mine's simple. I like to fidget with my keys. When I am stressed, that's just what I do. I fidget. So you'll notice that I start to do that the moment that I start to get high energy and get uncomfortable. So fidgeting is also another good in the moment, literally in your pocket technique. Number 3 is our recuperation. So what are we going to do for ourselves to recuperate after a stressful event has happened? This, again, keep it simple. So we're looking at, you're going to make sure that you stop and pick up a drink on your way home from work, your favorite drink. You're going to stop and, my little guy, when he has a rough day at school, first thing my 7-year-old wants to do is get Little Caesars breadsticks. It's just his self-care that he likes. He just feels like he needs that when he's stressed. When we look at recuperation, it can be calling, confiding in someone. It can be exercising. It can be taking a nap. After your stressful session, you have 30 minutes till your next one. Close your eyes, do a mindfulness activity. It can be simple. So that's our caregiver affect management, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves as practitioners so we can be effective caregivers, and also teaching our caregivers that they can be effective, and the way they're effective is by taking care of themselves. And go to the next slide. Okay. Middle of our house is attunement. The main idea of attunement is the ability to read a child's cues and respond in a way that maintains rhythm, supports co-regulation, and meets needs. Main takeaway I want you to have for attunement is that behavior, all behavior, is a message. When we're working with children, every behavior that you see, they're trying to tell you something. They're trying to give you a little hint of what's going on. Attunement focuses so much more on the cues that they give us than the verbs, the words that they tell us. A lot of times kids, especially those that have gone through traumatic stress, are unable to have the ability, whether it's they don't have the words or they don't have the regulation techniques, they're unable to fully express how they feel. And so it's important that we give them the power that we read their cues, that we recognize the behavior as a message. All right, we can go to the next slide. Okay, our last section, or our last building block in attachment is effective response. Basically, effective response is taking that attunement piece and it's building on it. It's saying, okay, I understand that behavior is a message. Now I need to respond effectively. And so we do that by building predictable, safe, and appropriate responses to children's behaviors in a manner that acknowledges and is sensitive to the role of past experiences and current behaviors. So we're saying that sometimes behaviors come in a place that makes zero sense, that they had a really stressful day at school and they come into session in therapy, or they come into a visit with you and they are just angry, but you didn't do anything yet, right? You hadn't said anything yet. That's displaced affect. It's bringing emotions into a place that doesn't fit. And it's because they don't have the ability to regulate their emotions. So when we're talking about effective response, ARC focuses on a kind of a function called label, validate, coach. Essentially, it's saying, I'm going to label what I see. I see that you're angry. I see that you're upset. So I'm going to label what I see. Then I'm going to validate it. It makes sense that you feel that way, right? So we say, we label it. So I see that it seems like you feel that way. And then it makes sense that you feel that way. The example I always give is if a child gets their toy stolen by someone else, I see that you're angry. That makes sense that you're angry. I would be angry if someone stole something important from me too. But then we go into the coach side. So we label, we validate, and then we coach. And coach focuses on being able to take what they're doing and change it and adapt it so that it's a positive way, right? I'm sure you've all done that with children or clients that you've worked with, saying, you know what, hitting someone probably isn't appropriate, but what's something we can do when we're angry? And giving them that other option. I think with effective response, it's important to recognize that we do not do label, validate, coach in a moment when they're extremely dysregulated. There's no teaching that's going to occur if a child is throwing a fit or a tantrum, if a client is extremely emotional. There's no teaching that's happening. We have to do it when they've calmed down and they're able to take a deep breath. And then we're able to use those and do our label, validate, coach. Label, validate, coach is a great way to normalize what they're feeling as well, so that they understand that it makes sense they feel that way, other people feel that way, and it's okay they feel that way. But what do we do with that? And that's where we get into problems. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so now we're moving up in our house. If you remember, our house moves now into regulation. And regulation, we talk about identification and modulation. Identification focuses on working with clients to build an awareness of internal experience. It teaches the ability to discriminate and name emotional and physiological states, and understanding why these states occur. So as we're looking at identification, simplify it down, right? Because all of those big terms are awesome and great. But if we simplify it, effectively, all we're looking at is saying we want a child to be able to understand what they're feeling themselves and make the connection that what they're feeling is also expressed in their body. Their body expresses how they're feeling. And then also be able to identify it in other people. I'm sure as you guys work with clients, it's critical for them to be able to identify how others are feeling. And so we start with identified in themselves and then move on to what can they identify in other people. All right, next slide. Okay, here's our modulation section. So like I said, again, this is in regulation. This is the middle of our house. Main idea of modulation is to work to create a safe and effective strategy to manage and regulate emotional experiences to maintain energy at a comfortable level. So the idea of modulation is you're feeling uncomfortable with something and you need to move that uncomfortable energy to a more comfortable state. So for example, if you have really high energy and you're feeling like getting up and running around or going on a walk, and you're told to sit in this meeting and listen for an hour, that's going to be really difficult to do. It's going to make you feel uncomfortable. So you need to do something in your body to adjust that energy level. And the way you do that is through modulation. We see modulation in a lot of ways. We see modulation with a caregiver and a child, or a caregiver and a person. We can do that through heartbeat, right? That's why infants love being with their parents. There's a lot of reasons why infants love being with their parents, but one of them is we co-regulate. We help them to regulate their body temperature and their body emotional state. As we get older, you'll see parents get down on their kids' level and ask them to, take 3 deep breaths with them. we're co-regulating, we're co-modulating, we're helping them get from an uncomfortable state to a comfortable state. We also have all of the amazing fidget toys that I'm sure have you've seen in one way or another. We find them all over the family place all the time because everybody needs different tools. And the cool thing about modulation is there's thousands and thousands of techniques that you can use that don't all have to be a fidget toy or a squishy ball or a breathing exercise. It can be a simple mindfulness activity, picturing a positive thing going on in your life. How can you make it better, right? Finding that moment of a positive feeling in your heart, right? What's something good that you feel that you want to share? And just taking that mindfulness moment can be a huge modulation as well. All right, we'll go to the next one. Okay, we are now in our top part of our house. So I'm moving through this quick. As we do this, we are now into competency. So competency has, those three top spots. The first is executive functioning. The main idea of executive functioning is to work with clients to act instead of react. My favorite thing to teach or to kind of remind people of in this executive functioning section is the brain simplified down. I am definitely not a brain scientist in any way, shape, or form. I have studied a lot of this particular thing that I'm going to teach you now. But to me, this is a simple way to teach to clients why their brain is doing what it's doing. And so we focus the brain in three separate sections. First, we're going to start at the bottom. That's our survival state. That's in our brain stem part of our brain. This is where we go fight, flight, or freeze. This is where we focus on safety. So when we're talking about survival state and safety, it's important to recognize we cannot move out of that until we actually feel safe. And so when you're trying to work with a client, especially those that are going through traumatic stress as a child, you're looking at the idea that they're probably in that survival state. And without a loving connection, which we'll talk about next, they're unable to move from that state. So they're continually fluctuating through those different brain states, trying to find a good, even level. Our second section is the emotional state. That's in our limbic system. This is focused on connection. Do I have a safe relationship, a safe enough relationship? Do I have somebody I can reach out to if I'm not okay? So we have our brainstem, fight, flight, or freeze, sorry. And then we have our emotional state. Can I rely on someone around me? So if I can rely on someone around me, I'm going to move from that brainstem into my limbic system. Once I have that safety and that relying connection, then I'm going to be able to move into my executive state or the prefrontal cortex. This is where I do my learning. This is where I do my communication. This is where I do my effective, positive decision-making. This is where all of those important things that make us human happen. And so as we're teaching clients, the brain isn't this magical thing. It's so intense and it's so controlling, right? Because it controls us. And we're telling them, you've gone through a traumatic event and trauma happens to a lot of people, right? We go back to that normalization. Trauma happens. And when it does, did you know you go into your brainstem? Your brain starts to focus on, are you safe? And if you're not safe, you're not going to be able to focus in school. You're not going to be able to communicate what you're feeling or your needs. You're not going to be able to do that until you're safe and you know you have someone that cares about you. And then you can do those things. And it's important parents learn that, right? If our child is our child client is really struggling being able to communicate what they're feeling to us, most likely it's because they don't feel safe, or they don't feel a strong connection to us, or something's going on that we don't understand. So it's critical that we teach our clients and we remember ourselves that brainstem is such a strong part of trauma. And that this is the other thing, those that have experienced traumatic events, those that have gone through those ACEs, right? 61% of people before the age of 18 that Maddie was talking about, those people go into their brainstem faster and they stay there longer than those that haven't experienced those traumatic events. So it's important that we teach our clients that what they're feeling is normal and what they're feeling is okay. And what do we do to get out of that survival state and into our executive state? We do that through modulation. We do that through effective response, through working with our clients to build a plan. All right, next slide. Okay, middle section is our self-development and identity. This is looking at supporting clients in exploring and building an understanding of self and personal identity. We know that children, especially children that go through childhood traumatic stress, specifically in some sort of the substance abuse drug realm, that they have a really hard time developing their own personal self-identity. And that's because they're constantly taking care of others around them. They have siblings they have to take care of. They have parents to make sure they're okay. And so when we get to work with clients that have gone through these things, it's critical that we take the time to identify what are their dreams, what are their hopes, and what are their talents. Who are they? And if they don't know who they are, who do they want to be? And so self-development and identity looks at and recognizes that children, especially those in traumatic childhood events, need to take the time to build that self-worth and that self-identity because they don't have it naturally because it was taken from them throughout their experiences. All right, next slide. Okay, our last building block in our competency piece is relational connection. This is helping children build the skills and tolerance for effectively engaging and sustaining a connection with others. We know that children and caregivers, people that have gone through traumatic events, really struggle building attachments. We know that if they didn't build an attachment early on in life, it's going to be harder for them to build them later. Not impossible, but harder. And because it's more difficult and because it's harder, we have a building block specifically for that, specifically saying, I want to build a connection with you and I want to make sure you're building a connection with others. So this section teaches them friendship skills. This section teaches them communication. What's an effective way to communicate with someone? It uses a lot of the I messages, right? We focus on how I'm feeling versus how someone else is feeling, and expressing that effectively. All right, that's our relational connection. Our next piece, you can go to the next slide, is our roof. So on the very top of our ARC framework is our trauma experience integration. Basically, it's bringing all the building blocks together to process through the trauma that children and caregivers have gone through. The trauma experience integration is saying that there's this big puzzle that's going on, right? We all see it. We all have a child or a caregiver come in that we're working with that just is a mess. And the best thing we can do is recognize that they're a puzzle that needs to be put back together. And as a practitioner, as someone that wants to work with clients and help them, my goal, my idea is that I want to fix the whole puzzle right now. But trauma experience integration says that's not going to happen because clients need time to heal. They need to go through all of these building blocks. They need to build attachments. They need to build relationships. They need to learn how to modulate their feelings. They need to learn how to identify their feelings. And in order, once they get through all of those things, the puzzle will be complete. But most likely it's not going to happen within the sessions that you're working with. You're going to get that outer part of the puzzle done, and then someone else will take it on and help put the other pieces in place. My other favorite part of trauma experience integration is simply thinking about the idea that we put it back on the clients, that it's their prerogative, it's their choice, how their help goes, right? How their treatment goes. And trauma experience integration says, I recognize you have trauma. I recognize you've gone through something hard. How can I help you get to where you want to go? And that's a big part of what I love about ARC is it simply says the trauma is there and the trauma is impacting you now, even though it may have happened a long time ago. But you still have the power and control over your own life and your own emotions. And what can we do to help you get to a point that you can feel hope again? So that's ARC. Is there any questions, any comments, anything Maddie and I can walk through with you guys to help you better understand kind of this whole presentation?
So once again, you can just either unmute yourself and ask those questions or put them in chat and I will have that go. It was a great way to understand ARC. Kurt and I were just chatting back and forth about that. You did a great job of sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah, so age ranges, we do, so in the kids place itself, at the family place, we work from ages 0 to 11. And so that's where a lot of my experience has been. But Maddie and the other therapists at the family place work with ARC all the way from 0 to forever. And I know in our education department, they actually use ARC in home visiting. And so they'll go in and teach the parents these ARC principles. So then the parents can teach the children. And so really it's a huge wide range of who you can actually implement it with. Thanks for your question.
I think one thing I'd want to add to that too is our home visiting program, in which we use what's called the ARC Grow curriculum that Brittany was talking about. It also prevents further victimization by teaching children and caregivers how to attune to one another and how to attach to one another so they can have a felt sense of safety. Thus, you know, like we talked about in preventing ACEs, being able to prevent further victimizations from occurring. And we've seen it to be very effective in doing exactly that.
So I have one question about COVID. Did COVID impact? I've heard that we've now all experienced at least one trauma with COVID and the isolation. Do you guys notice that? And is that true?
Yeah, Maddie, you're on mute. But yeah, so the CDC is actually working on adding that as an ACE, that COVID will be an automatic ACE for everyone. It's not, I don't think it's officially out yet, but it definitely is being discussed. And the NCTSN, the National Traumatic Childhood Network, yep, something to that effect. They say the same thing, that children, especially going through COVID, have all experienced a time of unpredictability, and therefore can be traumatic. Not every child will take it as far as an ACE, but most of them have now experienced a traumatic event. Okay, we'll let you get onto your case study, so we're on time for you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for all of your information. And that was just a great way to digest that framework. So thank you.
Of course.
Okay, so our next part, one of the things that as we had a discussion, we wanted to just do small breakout groups and ask how, because we're all from different programs, we're all from different agencies, and we all experience this impact of opioids differently. So we're going to do small breakouts today and really just ask, Bailey's going to put those couple of questions in there. And we're just going to discuss those in small breakout groups to have our case presentation. I'm really excited to hear how each of us do it differently, how we get a health history, how do we identify children. When we had this discussion amongst our hub team, both Tressa and I work in early intervention programs here in the state of Utah, but each of our programs does something different. And so hopefully we can learn from each other as well as just get some more information. So Bailey, if you want to put those in the chat.
Okay, there they are.
Okay, and then we're going to go into breakout groups. Tressa and myself and Kyla, we're going to be the leaders of those groups. So if you'll find a note taker or take the notes. And
I just started the group, so everyone can go ahead and join that.
Really?
Yes, we do.
All right. Well, you guys, so our breakout group had just some great discussions, and we will have all of those on our Canvas page so that you can go back and look. Jenny, she asked a really great question that I think I'm going to start using in some of mine. What did you not like that your parents did as you were growing up? I thought that was just a great way to get that open discussion going. So our next session is going to be fantastic from peer mentors that have actually been through the process of the opioid, how that has impacted their child raising and situations. So be sure to join us on June 8th at noon. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.